Hello, I'm Russ Ford, a member of the Western North Carolina Conference Commission on Archives and History. This is the final session in our series on training for church historians. This session is on writing your church history. Behind me, you see the chancel area of the sanctuary in Hawthorne Lane United Methodist Church in Charlotte. Several years ago, I was privileged to work with a committee of church members in writing the history of this church, celebrating its 100th anniversary. Today, we're going to talk a bit about you writing your church history. To begin, what do you want to include in it? Of course, you'll want to have the origins of your church. Who were the founders? What was their vision in starting the church? Important dates, your first church building and maybe later buildings. You'll want to list former pastors, maybe with some biographical information about each one. Sunday school classes, the choirs, United Methodist Women and Methodist Men, youth groups, scouting if your church sponsors scout troops, missions, fundraising, and fellowship activities. In their history, First Church of Lincolnton did something interesting, a whole chapter of interviews with older members recalling earlier days in the church. Now you must wonder, where am I going to get all this information? Well, let's go up to the Heritage Room. This is the Heritage Room, where the church displays its historical artifacts, with exhibits on things like scouting, Sunday school classes, and these photos of former pastors. This is also where we find some of the church's oldest records. When we were doing the history book on this church, this is where we found a lot of our material. As a church historian, you probably already know where the records are kept in your church. As a start, find out if someone in the past has already written a history of your church. Most likely it'll be out of date, but it'll give you a good start and possibly stimulate some ideas on details you'd like to add. What should you look for? Well, church council minutes, newsletters, old worship service bulletins, church directories, Sunday school class histories, if any, and records kept by the United Methodist Women, Methodist Men, and youth groups. Beyond the church's own files, check out the conference archives. You'll find a wealth of material there, including annual conference journals and even a file on your own church. They have some excellent books about Methodism in North Carolina that may even have information about your church and its former pastors. Your county register of deeds office will have records of real estate transactions involving your church. If your church was started by another older church, check with that church for any historical records they may have about the origins of your church. Old newspaper articles are especially a good source. Many libraries have archives of local newspapers. Searchable databases of newspapers on the internet can be a gold mine. Some charge a fee, but a short subscription could be worth the expense. Obituaries of deceased members can provide good background information on them. As you begin to gather material, it's helpful to set up file folders by chapters to keep it all organized. Start writing as soon as you begin to collect material. Remember, nothing is chiseled in stone. You can always go back and rearrange paragraphs. Try to balance your content. It's easy to focus on the first couple of years of your church, then jump ahead to modern times, but surely many things happened between those times. Think about events in the community or nation that might have impacted your congregation. Things like national affairs, natural disasters, pandemics, growth in your community, and new technology. How did these things affect your church or its members? Try to use names. People love to see their names in print, but avoid long lists of names. If you want to include a list, set it apart in a box so it won't slow down the flow of your narrative. As you write, keep in mind who's likely to see your finished work, including visitors, prospective members, others who might have an interest in your church. Write so even a non-member will know what you're telling about. Be careful with placeholders in text, such as insert date here. It's embarrassing when one of those dates doesn't get inserted and the words insert here shows up in your published version. You'll want to follow accepted rules for punctuation, spelling, and capitalizing. The Western North Carolina Conference has an excellent 2-page guide with standards specific to the United Methodist Church. Check the conference website for a copy. Used correctly, photographs can be a valuable part in telling your story. Except for a special section such as photos of all former pastors, every photo should relate to something in the text and should be placed as close as possible to that related text. A good photo shows people in action, pouring tea at a luncheon, hammering nails on a mission project, speaking in front of a group. Always include a caption. It can be just a name under a portrait or a complete sentence explaining what the photo is all about, but establish a style for each of these two types and be consistent. A common feature in church histories is a photo gallery of former pastors. If you're having trouble finding photos, first try the conference archives. Check surviving family members of deceased pastors. Your local newspaper might have photos on file, and another place to search is other churches your pastors might have served. And finally, just a word about copyrights. As with any kind of writing or publishing, you need to be aware of copyright laws. These apply to your use of any material created by other people. Excerpts from books, newspaper articles, photographs, music, even drawings and artwork. And except for a very few situations involving live worship in your sanctuary, churches are not exempt. An excellent guide has been compiled by the United Methodist General Council on Finance and Administration. You can find it on the internet at the address shown on your screen. And that, in brief, should get you started in writing your church history. If you do the job well, your work could be a valuable research resource in your church for years to come. It can be fun and rewarding. Happy writing.